Steve, Audra. Right. No worries, Megan. Brianna, Emma, Avery. Hello, hello, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back, Hilda. Sounds good, Avery. Thanks for the heads up. Hi, Karen. Hi, everyone in Maine. I know we have some Maine Youth Advisory Board folks. Feel free to update your name. You can hover over your picture and click on the little dots, the 3 little dots. And we'd love to see your name and what state you're in. You just put the initials. Hi, Bev. Welcome, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to those probably in Mountain Time still, right?
Hi, Kim. Yeah.
Good morning. Those who's in the morning. We're in the afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon from the East Coast. Good morning to Steve in Colorado, other folks in Colorado.
Good afternoon.
Welcome, welcome. And just in case you missed it, hi, Michaela. If you folks can add their state initials to your name, that would be helpful. And we're going to get started in just a second. Jason, you want to give folks maybe 60 seconds? I know we have a lot of folks still getting them over from the waiting room. All right.
Yeah, we'll get started here in about a minute. I know we only have an hour today and we want to make most of our time with Kate.
Again, just if you're just now sliding in, if you could add your state initials or the state that you're working with to your name, that would be great. Hi, Julie. Oh, and Gerard. Good afternoon, Gerard. I think I've gotten the same name, so if I haven't, Eden, Emma, welcome, welcome. And of course, all the AI note takers. Thank you for being here, AI. All right. Right, Jason.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, Madison. Good afternoon, good morning, depending where you're at. Excited for this peer learning community, for the Best Youth Initiative. Want to thank everybody for dialing in and for participating in the Best Youth Initiative and today's peer learning community. We build these to bring states together around topics that you really want to talk about. And so going back to last July's launch event, you identified that data management is a space that you would like to lean in on and learn more about. And in looking through everybody's discovery reports, certainly data is a big part of this. I think everybody knows me, but I'm Jason Callahan. I'm the Executive Vice President of Cross Systems Consulting and lead the Best Youth Initiative. Specifically, I'm leading the work in Connecticut and Indiana with those teams. I'm also joined by Megan McCann, who's our Executive Vice President of Policy, who's in Colorado, and Madison Quijano, who is our Director of Cross Systems and leading in Maine and helping in New York. And then Adrian Bard is leading our New York team. So welcome everybody. Before I kick this off, I'm remote today. I'm actually in Vancouver, BC at the TED 2025 event. And it's all week long. If you've seen TED Talks, it is an amazing thing in person. And I've heard people speak about ending like global poverty and eliminating the great garbage patch in the Pacific in 5 years and ensuring AI doesn't lead us to some type of dystopian future. And as I sat here and was listening to these amazing speakers, I was reminded of the amazing work that's being done in each one of your states by each one of you. And I just want to elevate the role that we all play in system change and being able to improve outcomes for young people across the country and the various places that we can lean into. So thank you for all the work you're doing, and hopefully you can find and continue to find inspiration through this initiative. Today we're going to talk about data management, and we're fortunate to have Kate Akers from Data Quality Campaign. Kate is the Vice President of Policy Implementation and Best Practices for Data Quality Campaign. She leads the development and execution of Data Quality Campaign policy implementation activities and provides thought leadership and support on DQC activities that support state and local efforts to adopt policy and practices that make data work for communities. And so we now are at like, what, 53 minutes. So I'm going to turn to you, Kate, and forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. All right. Of course, as soon as I hit present, all my screens move around. So hopefully you all can see and hear me, and you can perhaps see a slide that says using and sharing data to improve outcomes for youth. Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, it is such a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk with you today and really kind of dive into kind of my thoughts on data and coming together and the best use of that data and information, and then also give you some resources from the Data Quality Campaign as well. Thank you so much for the introduction. Here we go. All right, thank you so much for the introduction. Just a little bit more about me. So I've been at Data Quality Campaign for just over a year, but I've really been working with Data Quality Campaign, or DQC as we affectionately call it, for over 15 years. I was the former executive director of the Kentucky Center for Statistics, which is Kentucky's longitudinal data system. It spans from early learning, K-12, post-secondary, workforce, and several human service data sets as well, and provides information back to policymakers, practitioners, and the public. So I love bringing together data for a purpose and really talking about really meaningful outcomes. And then I spent the last 5 years actually in the state system of higher ed. So I come to this work really from a very state-focused lens. So I'll go ahead and flag that a lot of my language is kind of focused around state data systems and state level work. But I want to make sure that we're all, as we go through. So if you have questions about, any of the language that I'm using or any of hopefully I won't get into acronym soup, but if I do, please feel free to ask those questions in the chat as well. So let's go ahead and just dive in. So I'm going to try this in live. If it doesn't work, we're just going to kind of popcorn out in the chat. Does that sound good? But you can take your phones if you have them, or you can type in menti.com and use the note that's up, use the numbers that are up there. And I just want you to think, what word comes to mind when you think of data? And I'm not seeing any responses, so that makes me feel like perhaps it's not working. That's all right. If
No,
I do
it just takes a
this,
minute to find the website and
oh,
log
that's all
in.
right. If I do this, can you now see a Mentimeter screen? Fantastic. All right, it seems to be slowing down. This is fantastic, and thank you all so much for your willingness to be very honest and frank. So I see actually probably a lot more positive leaning words around data than I may have even anticipated. But knowing that information, numbers, stats, analysis, those seem to be coming out the most. But we're still seeing some kind of words about scary, intimidating, disparities. I like that word and that usage here, but also just information about facts, finite, outcomes, analysis, people, powerful. There's some really great words in here as you all are really thinking about data within your context. So feel free to if you haven't had a chance to keep adding on, we'll make sure and capture this and then share this back out with you as well. This is really helpful for me just to kind of level set where everyone is. So like I said, I really appreciate the kind of factual information that's coming through, but in terms of information and numbers, but also the real feelings about data and understanding how they can be intimidating, but they can also be used for transformation, necessary for storytelling. So hopefully a lot of this will come out in our discussion today. All right. So Data Quality Campaign, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. I'm actually based just southeast of Louisville, Kentucky. I live on my family farm in a very, very rural community, but enjoy going to DC quite frequently to engage with my colleagues and with others in this space. But we really envision this world where data is used to drive systemic change. And what I'm really hearing and reading more about the projects that you all are working in and really the need for high quality information is really a way that you are able to convey this to meet the needs of those that you are most serving. And I think that that's so compelling. So we really believe in everyone coming together. So family, educators, communities, policymakers to really make sure that they have the data and the information that they need to ensure these successful journeys through education and workforce and really that entire ecosystem. So I mentioned today just, kind of the language that we use to talk about data and talk about state level data systems in particular, and that may not be familiar to you. So again, please feel free to include any of those questions in the chat. And I want to talk about just a little bit of what this presentation and this conversation today is not about. There's a very big conversation as well around privacy, in particular around data. That's something that at Data Quality Campaign, we really feel like has to be the center, centering privacy in all the work that we do. We have a lot of resources on that, and I'm happy to connect you to other folks that are really experts in that area. But today we're really going to focus on the data, the use of it, really connecting with that data, and really facilitating conversations around it, knowing that privacy is really an important conversation, but a different conversation than what we're going to dive into today. So I just wanted to flag that as we get started. So I want to start and just kind of get us framed and thinking about data and how that's really related to a student journey, to a learner's journey in particular, and talk about one of our avatars. Her name is Grace. And so this is Grace some of Grace's potential pathways. So Grace identifies early on that she wants to go into the medical field, and specifically she wants to be a nurse. And so we've kind of worked to just chart out, again, these are very high level, and this is not exhaustive. As those of you that work directly with individuals, in no way is this exhaustive of all of the different pathways that Grace or someone like Grace may have. But what you'll see is that all along her pathway, and it starts in early education on the left, and then high school, including a career technical education or CTE component, into some sort of training programs post-secondary, and then finally, some career options. But you'll see these key decision points that Grace encounters as she goes along this pathway. So some of these decision points actually even happen within some of these areas, within K-12 to all the way through the K-12 experience as well. But thinking about these key decision points are where data do not naturally touch. So as a student leaves early learning and goes into kindergarten or the rest of their K-12 setting, those data systems are not naturally connected. As a student leaves high school and goes into any sort of additional training or post-secondary training in particular, those systems are not connected. And so it's a real opportunity to be able to bring together these data. Now, based on the work that you all are doing, you would probably take this and expand it, all along the continuum within, youth, and thinking about all of the different data systems that really need to come into play for any of the key decisions. And so the people that really need access to data in Grace's life, of course, Grace, right? Grace needs access to data and information. The counselors, the community supports that she has also really need data access. Her teachers, those, within her community, maybe within advocacy organizations, but then also policymakers need access to data and information so they can see what are the programs that are most successful within Grace's journey. So we like to use this as kind of just an example of how this, the journey that Grace is taking really involves data and information, and the need for critical data and information for a very wide variety of stakeholders. So I want to take just a little bit of time and kind of do a little bit of an introduction and kind of where my mind goes when I start thinking about data access, use, and engagement. So we have done a lot of polling research at DQC, and a lot of real focus on access to data and information and what access really means. And access may mean something different depending on where you fall within those stakeholder groups. Sorry, I couldn't tell if there were things in the chat, but if anybody wants to make sure that I flag those, that would be helpful. I love the question. There's a question about the difference between public and private data. I think that's probably something that we could go into when we're talking about privacy in particular, but I want to flag that just as a really good question. So understanding that when we talk about access, that could mean very different things. So it could mean people having access to their own data and information, or it could be meaningful access to a dashboard, or it could be just having readily, accessible facts and information, program evaluation. And so it really depends, that access and what that means really depends on the real needs of whomever it is that's accessing that. And then ensuring that of course, privacy and security is central to those discussions. So what's really interesting is that DQC has been championing state data systems for 20 years, which is really incredible. To me, 20 years. And we've been at the beginning of this conversation. However, despite these systems and everything that they're doing, polling all says that people still need better access to data and information, even in states that have really robust systems, even in programs with really robust systems, and that really states have an opportunity to really think about their data system to really meet data access needs. not as an IT project, right? Where you're, oh yes, and we're gonna, upgrade and we're moving to the cloud, and all of that's fantastic, by the way, but really focusing it around data access and needs, knowing that data should help enable successful transitions, like those key decision points we saw with Grace. So understanding that even leading states like Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Indiana, these have all been recognized as real leaders within the state data field. However, we find routinely of data barriers even in each of these states. We also see similar conversations when we're just looking from various stakeholders. So understanding the real importance around data access and the focus here is really critical. So I like to look at, some of these specific ones, thinking about students. So students, 80% report that they would feel more confident about their path, like Grace, after high school if they had better access to information. And then understanding that access may be outcomes for college programs, outcomes for the military, outcomes for, whatever those next steps are, or outcomes directly after high school into the workforce. And then we also see that parents who are also very close to these data and information said that easier access to this information would help them feel more confident about their ability to help their children. We find the same thing to be true about teachers and counselors, and then leadership as well, and superintendents and principals, which show up, almost at 100%, say that they would feel more confident if they had better data access. So I'm going to pause just for a minute, just for a second, and then we're going to talk just a little bit about building trust and findings, and then we're going to really open it up for discussions from the group. Kind of your thoughts so far, and then really identifying some of those challenges that you all have seen. All right, so this will come as no surprise, I think, to any of you, both kind of data users and people that, even when you ask about data are like, it's powerful, it's great information, as well as those that maybe have just been on the receiving end of data, that people won't use data that they don't trust. I'm sure you all find this even within your work outside, even, at home, and not even just within your work setting. So today we're going to focus on kind of three pieces of this: context, framing, and proximity. So mistrust in data is often the result of incomplete information. I don't trust that data because it doesn't resonate to me. There's not enough information there. I hear this fact or this figure and it's out there, but I don't even know what population it's talking about, or I'm not sure if that's actually representative of the sample, or I don't know how it was calculated. So understanding that a lot of mistrust in data is often the result of really just incomplete information. States and districts who primarily produce this type of data, they can overcome these barriers by really proactively sharing information around the context, the framing of the data, and the proximity. And then this, in turn, providing this information really informs communities, so these data consumers that really are receiving this data and information, a greater sense of clarity, which really helps to build trust. And then that, in turn, enables them to use data with confidence. I like to think about it as really understanding the whole story behind student data. And I think as we're talking about data around youth in particular, that really resonated to me, and thinking really holistically about these individuals. So how do we bring together this data and information that really describes the full context, that's framed appropriately, and really helps to build the trust in the data? So thinking just a little bit more about context in particular, we all know that no single data point or measure can just paint a complete picture of what's happening within a school, within a program, even within an individual person, and their kind of life cycle as they go through this education and workforce ecosystem. So context is really important to really bring in additional pieces of information to really paint that picture. So really helping to understand what the data really means and how to act on it. Context helps consumers, whether that's the student or a teacher or a counselor or a community member, really understand what the data means and how to act on it and make sense of those numbers. So when you're producing information and you fail to include context, consumers, those using this data are likely to jump straight to assumptions about what the data mean, and they may not really be positioned on how to act on the data. So sharing as much contextual information as possible when you publish data is really critical. For example, something like a state report card or any type of reports that you're doing should include clear definitions. It should include methodology, like this is who's in, if I say the numerator, those that fell into this category, or the denominator, kind of the overall population. Like what groups are included in there? Are there things that we should know about the data quality? Was there a year? Was there maybe some national event, maybe like a pandemic that may be altering these data and thinking about trends and information and really providing more holistic contextual information. So I think that as we work to really build trust and pulling data together and providing data. So I'm just going to keep going. But, thinking about the framing is also really critical. So we talked about context and how it's not just one piece of data, but framing is also critical, listening and engaging with communities that are really reflected in the data. That's why I'm so glad that this initiative in particular has individuals with learned life experiences in these areas to really also help build in kind of the framing. So understanding that trusting the messenger has as much to do with who is conveying the message as how that message is being framed. People want their data framed in a way, and this has always really resonated with me, in a way that maximizes their ability to be successful. So really, we would call that asset framing. So it doesn't increase existing challenges, like focusing on deficits, but this asset framed really means that it's used to support individuals and recognizes that they bring their own backgrounds and experiences into the classroom, into their programs, into their communities, and it really engenders trust. When we think about framing data in a deficit, that can often blame individuals. That would include families, students, teachers, community leaders for the actions of decision makers, and it's really disempowering. So when we're thinking about producing information, just to be clear, this isn't saying presenting sunshine and roses. It's really making sure that information is framed in a way that includes, that there are good intentions and actionable steps with the data, as opposed to only using data like as a hammer, right? Sometimes we say we want to be able to use data as a flashlight rather than a hammer, and ensuring that we're framing this in a way that is inclusive of the intent of the data collection and the program is a really great way to help move forward and to build trust. All right, and then the last one before we really kind of go into some group discussion about this is around proximity. So the data quality campaign's national polls that we were talking about earlier consistently show that parents and teachers, that parents trust teachers, the most to collect and use their child's data, much more than like a state Department of Education. So I don't know if that's surprising to anyone. I found that an interesting finding is what I would say. So we know that people are most likely to trust data coming from those that are closest to the student. And so you would say that that's also true by those counselors that are helping to support them, those community folks that are working directly with those students. There's a real trust that's inherent in there as opposed to receiving a school level report card from the Department of Education, which are important, by the way, but at the same time, building that trust, the proximity, those that are closest to the data. So those that are often working with real-time operational data and information about these students are those that are the easiest to trust. But when data doesn't reflect what parents and what teachers are really seeing and hearing, they find it harder to trust. from a, my background's really in statistics, and I would call this like face validity. If I'm involved in this community and I see something and I'm like, wow, that does not resonate with anything that I've ever heard of before, and in fact, it's contradictory, I may really lose trust in any sort of data and information coming out of there. So ensuring that, these pieces are aligned, and that where there isn't alignment, you're setting that context, you're framing it in a way that helps to explain those differences, is a really key way to think about proximity. So with that, I've done a lot of talking, but with that, I want to just kind of dive in and have us really respond and think about what are some examples of challenges in trusting data that you all have seen in the past, or are currently seeing, or maybe even those that you anticipate seeing. And then what are some of those contributing factors to stakeholders not trusting data? So I gave you some hints of what some of those might be, right, in those previous slides. But I'm curious from the group here, in your experiences, what are some examples of challenges that you're seeing in terms of trusting data?
Yes, I could start by saying, like you said, not understanding the data, thinking data is really scary, and not being able to figure out, it just looks like a lot of numbers, but not really contextualizing or framing how to use it.
Great, thank you. Does that resonate with others in this group? Seeing some chats, which are really great, trying to find information that's more closely related to what I'm trying to find. I think that's a great flag as well. Like, how does this even compare to other information? Where do I find those resources? Who's collecting the data? So trust of that person providing the data, and that's getting a lot of plus ones as well. Julie?
I would say the timing has so much to do with it. Here in the state, we're just finishing up our what other states might refer to as their YRBS. And in Maine, it's called the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey. And so we started that in February, and there are a few schools finishing up in April. So we're like, it seems a lot has happened between February and April. So it's the timing, and I'm sure that goes along with proximity too.
It's great. Okay, I'm going to try Hilda. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I would say, I think just genuinely speaking, especially right now, in a world with politics being the way politics is, but also like social and confirmation bias being a really to build trust with people that they disagree with, and then in turn they don't trust the data. And I think I personally struggle because I'm like, I don't know what else I can do to help people and help myself even trust data more when it's not essentially what I agree with or what I want to see. And so I just think that's a huge challenge that we're seeing right now with everything going on politically and algorithms and all of that. Just trusting people to trust data has become a huge challenge.
I like that. Trusting people to trust data. And I also really enjoyed your use of the word confirmation bias there, right? And really understanding, understanding data that you disagree with, or maybe you disagree with the methodology, or maybe you disagree with how that information is coming together. Some of the other examples that are up here talking about, balancing quantitative data and qualitative data, understanding access to very specific data resources, age of the data set. So age, and then I would say, just understanding that so many data that are presented specifically at the state level are presented, 6 months, a year, sometimes in arrears. If we're looking at something like a like a program outcome, it's usually actually several years after the program completed, and then understanding that it's very possible that things have happened since then. And so really pulling all that together. These are great. Caleris, I'm so sorry if I did not say that correctly.
No, you're great. So I think there are several things that come up for me as a parent digesting the data, looking at the data. One thing is a lot of data is analyzed in a nuanced way.
Recording in
Nor is
progress.
it looked at in a nuanced way where what if you have multiple factors impacting students? So it really limits our perspective in terms of the kind of work that we can do. And then the last thing I'm going to say is that we also shun from qualitative data and narratives. Creating our goals, our SMART goals about what we want, the kind of work we want to do in our schools or in our districts. We never talk about that qualitative data of the experiences our students are having and how that comes into play with our diverse data analysis on different types of assessments. So it makes it really difficult to really target some of those vulnerable students.
Very well said. I took several notes as you were bringing that up. And I was thinking specifically when you were talking about disaggregating information basically and making sure like to understand all those dimensions, but then how we protect that when we know it's going to be maybe a very few number of students. So how do we make sure that we are capturing that in a way and sharing to make sure that those voices and those stories are being told, but at the same time protecting that privacy of those individuals. And I think that it's possible that that's a great spot for this qualitative information to come in and to kind of safely share these stories and this information in a way that really works with the quantitative information to really add in that context in particular. Maybe a mixed methods approach, so to speak.
Yeah, it's amazing. Wish we could do it and have the resources to both.
I'm going through. There's lots of great comments that are here as well. Madison.
Hey, I just kind of come on to remind folks to kind of write out your acronyms in the chat and any language that you might feel is really jargony or not language that everyone on the call uses all the time. Just want to invite folks to put some good metaphors and definitions in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you. I always appreciate that, that reminder. I come from, working in state agencies where you have like literal books of all the acronyms that you use and then you use them all together. So I want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language here today. So thank you. All right. Well, you guys actually hit a lot of my kind of notes that I had written down because I didn't know you guys really came prepared and talking about some of these real challenges and trusting data, which was so helpful. But understanding timeliness, not including all stakeholders. I think we heard several examples of that. Understanding like when data are collected, how the information is calculated, who's included. If it is a survey, who's included within the survey. I saw one comment that said one of the challenges of surveying is that you actually may negatively impact the work by asking questions in a specific way. And so to really be thoughtful about survey design as well. Understanding who's responsible for the data, who do they call, who do they contact with And then missingness. So how are we talking about missingness in terms of responses and data collected? Those are all kind of additional ones, and several of which were really mentioned within this. But this is great. This has been a wonderful discussion. So I'm going to keep going just because I know that we don't have a ton of time, and want to make sure that we get to as much stuff as we can. This is a incredibly busy slide. I'm very sorry. I will provide these at the end so you can have them. So don't feel like you need to write everything down, although you're more than welcome to take a screenshot of it. This is also available on DQC's website. But I just wanted to show you some of these kind of promising practices within this space that Data Quality Campaign identified. So Baltimore Promise in particular, so the Baltimore Youth Data Hub, they identified that young people need cohesive support across the different parts of their lives to help them achieve their goals. So thinking about that diagram of grace earlier, but now we're really thinking about all of the supports and what's needed to help grace, move through this ecosystem. So in Baltimore, all of these agencies really and organizations that were focused on serving youth came together, including families, because they realized they were all really working in silos. So this lack of coordination and information sharing made it difficult for them to even see the full picture of what young people need. They had trouble identifying their service gaps, and even addressing, historic disparities within various groups within the city of Baltimore. So this Baltimore Youth Data Hub really enabled agencies and organizations to securely, that's important, securely share and access critical information about these populations that they serve, which really helped them to more effectively and equitably support Baltimore's children, youth, and families. They began this work in 2017. And then it took them several years to really kick it off. So they really focused on a vision, bringing together people from the city schools, the Family League, as well as Baltimore Promise, this overarching group, to really think through vision, governance, these shared priorities, and then really what community engagement really looks like for this. So this idea is that they brought together data from every group that they could find. It looks a little bit blurry on my side, but in the middle, you've got Baltimore Youth Data Hub, and then underneath it says education and workforce, health, social services, the nonprofit community. But then understanding that within and take time for them, and they're able to quickly connect it. So people working with youth can quickly see information, not just from health and evaluation, better understand long-term outcomes of this work in particular. So if you haven't heard of the Baltimore Youth Data Hub, definitely has more text, you're welcome. I wish that it had a really beautiful picture that went along with it, but this is really talking about Nashville, Tennessee's after school programs. So they had this partnership, which I thought was really interesting, between the Metro Nashville Public Schools and then the city funded after school program for youth, or the Nashville After Zone Alliance, NASA. So these two organizations decided they really wanted to come together and share data, because things were happening within the schools that were not being, that the after school folks were not aware of, and access to these after school staff for this K-12 data. So really interesting use of, data use sharing within this. It doesn't need to be a barrier here, that there are processes in place that they were really able to enact on. So I think that this was a really interesting example of, even folks within kind of this within one city, just like in Baltimore, really coming together and saying, wow, we have a lot of like data and information. Wouldn't it be great if we could share that information? And because
Recording in progress.
these really make sense in ways that we're really beginning to identify some of these promising practices. So thank you.
Recording in progress.
Did these examples resonate with you all in some of the work that you're doing? And if not, that's okay. Or perhaps it was a lot of text on a page and you would
model, perhaps that is a way, because if student A moves from one end of the state to the other, sometimes getting the important information from point A to point B just isn't timely to truly help that student. So I really appreciated that. And I also want to give a shout out to how proud I am that in Maine, I was talking about the YRBS, and in Maine, it's Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey, that this has been in place since 2009. So having that consistency and that collaboration between the HHS and the education is really a positive for us. So I just wanted to give that a little shout out.
That's incredible. Thank you. Audra.
Yes, you know what? I mean, I love data. I have an engineering background. I think data is great. And I'm just wondering, and maybe this is kind of like for Jason, but I feel like how do you get the data? You know, like I think it would be really interesting. I mean, there's so many questions I have. As a person with lived experience, my daughter has special needs in Connecticut, is working really hard to improve the outcomes of adults, specifically young adults with IDD, as they sort of like transition out of the public school system. And I mean, I have a million questions that I feel like data could answer. And I just am, I guess my question is, how do you go about it? Obviously there's privacy and, I think that's kind of, I love everything you've said, and I'm like, oh, great, but how do I maybe help, the Connecticut contingent here try and get the data we need to make these, collaborations in these programs like these other states have done.
Kate, I would definitely welcome any input too, but what I would say as we, as the 5 states are starting to look at their strategic roadmaps and really start building their strategic plan, it's like we need to suss out, like we need to identify what is that data and really think about what is the purpose of it. And I'm guessing there'll be places where we already collect that data through K-12 or other systems. And then there's probably gaps in data too for us to be able to say, like, these are areas that we would, and again, I think audience is important, or who is the consumer of the data? Is it parents? Is it practitioners? Is it policymakers? And ultimately, I would think as we build out these plans, we need to contemplate, like, who are the consumers of that? So answering those things, I think we can get closer to answering your question.
And I have a few examples as well that actually, Jason, you did a great job of describing them, but really some like state policy recommendations. These would also work at the local level. So I'll talk about those kind of briefly as we begin to wrap up.
I would say, oh, sorry.
No, please do.
Just some of the challenges that I think about, and they kind of all go together in like data access, and how people engage is a lot of the time I feel like and from my personal experience, the people who are impacted by, say, all of these programs or this research that is intended to create more equitable environments for people, the people who should be surveyed don't necessarily have access to those surveys or don't have the luxury of time to engage in those surveys. Like, I'm very lucky that I have a job that it's allowing me to do this right now and be a part of this. But if my job wouldn't have allowed it, I wouldn't have been able to be here. And so those are just some of like the challenges, and especially in today's society, disclosing some of those challenges that you are having, whether it's based on race, identity, immigration status, any of that is going to be more challenging for folks to do and share. And so I feel like that will impact the data that is received.
That's great. Thinking about those that don't have time, or don't have the resources or don't have the expertise to actually engage with surveys or engage with the data, and then the impacts that has on the results themselves, in addition to the actual implementation. I think that was very well said. All right. So as I, oh yes, please.
Yeah, I just again, I'm a neuroscientist by training and do this as a job, but I will say that during the pandemic, there was a lot of missing data in terms of how our schools were being impacted. And I think that what was remarkable, at least in the work that we did in New York during that time, was that I think a lot of people like grabbed the bull by the horn and generated data that was useful to community. So some of the things that I learned with just grassroots organizing was that there's so much untapped talent. Like, we're so used to like systems and structures that have people and experts in certain spaces. And I think during that time, it kind of opened the door to engage with folks from other communities. We didn't have, we didn't have those walls anymore. And so, for example, at the time, I created a group with some other parents, and we got some programmers, and we created a website to inform New York City parents about what was happening in terms of COVID cases in New York City. And there was data that we scraped from the web with programmers from that just volunteered to help us in terms of children that were passing away because of COVID, children, you know, like really impacted communities that our city was not talking about. And so I think that one of the things that we have to do as folks that are in these spaces is like look beyond, again, those systems and structures, those titles, and really think innovatively in terms of how to collect the data, how to interact with the data, because there are ways that we can do that in a way that connects with the needs of our communities much more so than having an expert in that space. And I say that as an expert in certain spaces. Like I love to see other people that just can look at it with fresh eyes. And I think that that's some of the things that we get bogged down with when we're part of these different collectives that aren't really as community focused.
Incredibly helpful. And I love that focus and thinking about some of those communities in particular, and then how to really maximize that implementation. So I want to leave you all with this. I've already identified that it says SLDS, which I'm sure everyone here knows that acronym. I'm just kidding. State Longitudinal Data System. These are really the hubs in which data come together. So some of the strong systems, Colorado, if you're not aware, you guys are really engaging in this process right now, which is really exciting. So there's legislation now in Colorado, in particular, to bring this data together, and several of the other states that are represented here are making really great progress. These policy recommendations are also appropriate, I think, really at the local level, within agencies even. And so I've just highlighted a couple, and I think that actually many of these really came up today, but mapping existing assets to identify system strengths and limits. So what data do you already have access to? Jason, this is exactly what you were outlining in this process. Engaging the public and really those that are going to be most impacted by the programs to prioritize your data access. For the person earlier that asked, you know, how do you do this? How do we do this? Well, first, you really have to figure out what even needs to be done. What are you trying to solve? What questions do you have that you can't currently answer? You know, developing and acting on rollout plans when building data access. You know, something that Colorado, and I'm picking on you just because I'm helping with some of that implementation, which is going fantastic, by the way. But, you know, identifying what an early win looks like. How can you get data out there that's relevant to your audience and really make progress, even before maybe you're ready to put out your first gigantic report? How do you really help to build trust in that data in particular? Centering privacy, which I think I've already said maybe 10 times today, but that's a really critical component of this, but really its own separate conversation. And then finally, supporting local leaders and building their own capacity to use data. So I think it's you know, helping to build that capacity, but then I would also say building capacity wherever who is creating this data or pulling this data together and producing it, making sure that they are also connected with their stakeholders. So I will leave this with you all just as our general framework, but it was such a pleasure to be here. So I know we have approximately 1 minute, so I'll turn it back over to Jason. But thank you all so much. This has been so much fun. I loved hearing from you all, and I'm so excited to watch this work.
Thank you so much, Kate. And please, everybody, join me in thanking Kate. Again, Kate is doing incredible work across this country, and it's a great resource as states start leaning into this space, and we'll continue to lean into this space. So thank you, Kate, and for supporting this effort. I just want to leave everybody thinking about part of this data conversation is about asking more questions. And I think, Claris, you brought up about the pandemic. And again, we had some of this real-time data, but there were gaps in it. And it allowed us to go a little deeper in some of the questions and some of the behaviors or some of the responses we were having. It led us to be a little bit more strategic than we had been in the past. And so I want to really leave us today to think like, don't let perfect get in the way. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? Like we need to keep taking steps forward in this space. And it is iterative. But as we think about how do we define youth thriving? And Hilda, I think you brought up the point of like, who's at the table? That's why people with lived experience are so important to this conversation is like, how are we collectively defining youth thriving? How are we thinking about quality work-based learning and defining that? How do we ensure that every school system is defining excused and unexcused attendance or absences? What does success look like for justice involved youth as they re-enter? And then what programs are working with mental health as they students are transitioning from middle school to high school? So I think about the 5 initiatives that we're focused on and the Best Youth Initiative, and data will help us, I think, be far more strategic. So thank you. It's 2:00. Again, we'll have access to the slides and the recording. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, y'all. See ya.